Language is acquired because humans have developed, since they were born, abstract thought, creative thinking, and cognitive skills. So they are deducted since they are born.
And since they are born, they manage to understand that communication was good for survival. Meaning that as they saw something, they started thinking, oh, this thing makes sound. If I make a sound to say, oh, that's meat, that's going to be good for me and good for the other person. Meaning that they were able to synthesize the outer world and turn it into language. Now turning into our first argument.
No, es...
Falta el segundo.
Sí, no, se grabó, ¿no?
Ya sí, güey, está haciendo un dramatic effect.
Language, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is a system of communication. Humans have different capabilities, and nowadays this is known as evolution. Now we don't rely on a soul or intelligence to do so. Now we just rely on communication. A perfect example of this can be in the natural world. As animals that don't have advanced cognitive skills can communicate with each other. That is why we don't believe that there is such a soul. We believe in evolution and in genetics.
Language is a human manifestation of the world around us, which is how we synthesize the world.
Yeah, so we get to know everything because of our senses, because of our perception. So we think about this, we process it, and we synthesize this information we get from our environment, and we make language. We assign a name to everything, and then we relate things, and that's why the language is knowledge.
Because of what Pablo and Pam said, it would be very wise to argue that knowledge is actually not acquired but born with, as it manifests your possibility of expressing knowledge and as well as synthesizing within your head. That's why, first let's begin with that first argument so we can counter-argue it.
Which is basically speaking about how other species works, as we as humans are also an animal species. Other animals, such as dolphins, such as elephants, that have developed language, they manage to do this though with creative thought too. Because think about another creature other than humans that manage to create language and are not as smart as us. That is just not happening. You see the incidents since prehistoric times, the incidents of the modern man when it appeared. At the same time, they managed to write, they managed to make rupestral paintings. Meaning that as soon as they acquired the abstract thought and the creativity skills, which is why I address the paintings, they managed to synthesize the world into language.
Now, moving on into our second argument.
El segundo.
No. Let's begin with the first argument. The first argument is actually very attached to what we believe. As yes, there is an extent to the innateness of the possibility of humans to learn language. There is rupestral paintings ever since the beginning of the modern man, and as well as other species that are able to communicate through that have the capability of abstract thought and advanced cognitive skills, which would lead us to think that yes, the possibility of learning language is innate. However, language itself is not. Language itself is part of a hermeneutic loop, according to Kierkegaard. First, you have the understanding of the whole of life. That's when you see a concept and you synthesize it. And something very unique about humans is that we do think in language. Regardless of us understanding the world through a feeling or through a concept that just comes into our mind, we synthesize our ideas within our head with language. Thus, we raise a question or need for meaning of an event or part. any concept that you can imagine, we just see it, then we raise the question of why is it there? And thus we make this question through language, which is a personal manifestation of knowledge through language inside of a human being. Then comes the requirement of meaning projected through action or speech. That's when external meaning, that the external manifestation of knowledge comes into part, which language is imperative for this. Why is it imperative? Because what other means of communication we have to express an idea to a fellow human other than language? There are ideas that are too complex to make people understand my own perspective without language. And then comes the engagement, the phenomenon or the part of life. That's when we accept this concept into our life, and we can reflect on it through language again, so it can evolve the concept. Then comes the engagement with part afflicts feedback, which challenges the understanding of whole. This is the marketplace of ideas when another human comes to us and counters or changes our perspective. And how does it change it? Again, through external manifestation of knowledge, which comes through language. And then the challenge triggers a reflection, a reinterpretation, and greater understanding through hermeneutics, because now you have a marketplace of ideas which shares the same concepts under two different perspectives, which are shared by language and are reflected upon language.
I would disagree with myself, as regardless of advanced language being, advanced cognitive skills and abstract thought being required for advanced language, there are things that many consider language that are not necessarily as complex as, Spanish, English, French, or a dolphin dialect. That example could be seen in birds. Birds make signs when there's nightfall, when they find food in a tree, when they're looking for their mothers, as well for many other birds and as well as many other mammals, and even reptilians such as crocodiles also make sounds to communicate and locate prey in order to get help, as they're not lone fighters. So this could be considered language, as it is a way of communication, so it fulfills the criteria that I stated in the first argument in before. It fulfills the criteria as it...
Now, it is important to take into account that it is not necessary that these two arguments are both not inherently wrong. Now, this is something extremely important when analyzing this case. Why? Because when we go back into our position statement, we can see that we very clearly stated that knowledge and language are intrinsically linked. This is via the, language being the human and also physical manifestation of knowledge. This being physical through sound waves, of course. Now, when it comes to animals, yes, there can be such a thing as language if we take it to be as a physical manifestation of knowledge. Why? Because these animals are communicating things that they have perceived to be real around them. And it is all about perception. We have seen time and time again that language and knowledge in itself is not about things other that are intangible, but rather how we perceive things that are completely tangible and how we make connections between that which we understand and that which we do not understand. Now, it is important to take a look at Kant's theory here. Kant tells us very clearly that it is, of course, that language and knowledge, by extension, is, of course, simply our perception of the world around us. Now, why is this important? Why is this interpretation of knowledge by Kant even to be taken into account? Because it tells us what knowledge is, and knowledge being such an abstract concept, it is very hard to define. So for this debate, we have chosen time and time again, even though we did not realize it in our first and second debate, to base our definition of knowledge and language in the perception around the world. and perception of the things around us in order to be able to peg that concept down, which is crucial for this debate. Now, if we were to look at the comments made by Emilio in that very same video, we would see that he is not inherently incorrect. Same as he was not inherently not incorrect or correct in the first video. This is because this being such a broad area and this being such a broad debate, we really cannot peg down what language is or what knowledge is. However, we can reach an approximation in the philosophical understanding of it. And that is what we have been trying to do. Thus, we can see that there can be many types of knowledge and there can be many types of language emanating from said knowledge, thus creating a debate which can at times seem Byzantine, however can really go extremely deep, and that we have been able to really explore in most of the ways that have been deemed necessary for this debate.
Makes communication good, and it's still making communication good for survival. Thus, this is language that comes from genetics, does not come from abstract thought. It's a genetic trait that is not the outcome of a synthesis or advanced cognitive skills, it's simply the outcome of perfect nature engineering.
Now, moving on into our second argument, we can also see that all evidence points towards humans learning language and not them being born with it. A great example where we can see this is in the girl in the window case, in which a severely abused child was rescued by police and could not even talk. So we can see that this girl and her inability to talk through neglect and through the lack of social contact gives us a very good standing to see and realize that language is learned rather than acquired through a biological process. What my partner was saying previously is also extremely important. The importance of cognitive thought and of abstract thought and the ability to synthesize everything gives us the ability to develop new languages tailored specifically to different regions of the world. That is why we have different languages.
So, according to our last argument, now we think that it's possible for us to have Plato described it as a soul, because it's a part of us. It can be energy or ideas that is unchangeable, and it can go through many bodies because it's independent from the body. Now we think that this soul is genetics. So yeah, indeed, it can go through many generations and gather many experiences, and of course it develops during time. Yeah, Plato also said that this soul was just us, independent from the body, from our physical appearance.
Counter-arguing ourselves with the arguments provided by our first and second debate, we can say, well, we could potentially say that there is an extent to which the philosophical perspective is okay, however the biology of it is mistaken. Take this into account. I did mention in the second debate that some animals have inherited capability of communication, which could be considered language. That's something that Manuel also said. Which would mean, technically, that, yeah, language is not necessarily acquired, and the ability of speech is indeed inherited, which would support an argument. But from a philosophical perspective, we would have to see the complexity of it. How deep can you go with signs, and how deep can you go with sounds that are not synthesized into a language? you really can't go that far to explain concepts and ideas, because there is a limit. There is a way much more limited movements that you can make, and it's much more harder to keen the eye with only movements. So you would have to rely on a very complex manner of communication that would not be language. Thus, yes, language could technically be not human exclusive and be not inherited, and be an inherited trait by knowledge. But we don't really think that's the case from a philosophical perspective, because from a philosophical perspective, language itself is knowledge, and knowledge is acquired. Thus, you would have to say that there is an extent to where language is acquired, however the capability of it is innate. So that would be the counter of our counter argument. Yeah, just move on.
To synthesize what we said about Plato's understanding of the soul being correlated to our understanding of genetics today, see it as it acquires traits from previous generations. This is something that nature does. It acquires traits that were affected with survival, thus they reproduce more, thus they express themselves in humanity or in any species that is alive today, as it acquired information from previous generation, and it is applicable today as a survivally adequate trait. And yeah, that also to counter what Manuel said on the previous debate, the girl that was rescued by the police could also suffer trauma, and as there is many biological processes that can damage the brain and even damage our capability to speak with collagen. Collagen actually makes the brain smaller at a young age, meaning that she could have suffered from that. No, it's a counter argument.
Now, the counter argument to all of this.
In conclusion, in order to have language, we would first need to have knowledge. And as Manuel said, language can come in many forms, as innate feelings or expressions, or as we know it as English or Spanish. Both need knowledge.
Yeah, of course. Language, it can be innate, because if it comes, as Pamela said, in a way of feelings, how do we explain that just babies feel hungry and feel they need to do something, they need to move in order to make their mom know what they need? And it can be acquired because we have the capacity to learn, like any language that we know nowadays, like German, English. We can also learn different language apart from this. We can learn sense language or body language. And so, yeah, we think that it can be acquired and it can be innate.
We think, just to link everything to what we said, language itself is acquired. The possibility of language is innate. Thank you very much.